Welcome to the 12-Step Big Book Workshop. My name is Lisa, and I am a long-term student of the 12 Steps method of recovery. I'm so glad you are here tonight. It's never too late to start this journey. Normally, this PowerPoint is during a live class, but after last night's class, I realized the recording didn't get recorded, so I'm just going to redo the whole thing. It just won't be live with other people. So please join me in the set aside prayer with an intention of having a spiritual intervention, whatever that means to you, a willingness to have an open mind and heart, and the gift of receiving it beyond your willingness and consciousness to even having it. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my will, my need to be in control, and you as my source of power for a new experience with myself, step one, and especially your power. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So tonight we're crossing over. We're going beyond the dash in step one. When I start, I cannot stop, and when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. An addict at certain times will have no effect of mental defense against the first drink. We need our higher power. Bill wanted to be very clear on this. It was his intention in step one to give us this information about the allergy and the craving in the body, and to give us the information about obsession and delusion of the mind, and to give us his definition of insanity. An alcoholic at certain times will have no effect of mental defense against that first drink. We need God, or whatever your higher power is. Quoting a staff member's statement in regards to alcoholics admitted to a world-renowned hospital, Bill said, "As to the two of you men, whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. People like you are too heartbreaking. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution." And Bill said this was not a religious person saying this. When I start, I cannot stop. And when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. An addict at certain times will have no effect of mental defense against the first drink. We need our higher power. Bill wanted to be very clear on this. It was his intention in step one to give us this information about the allergy and the craving, and also to give us the information about obsession and delusion in the mind, and lastly, to give us his definition of insanity. Now, we will explore the best kept secret in the 12-step fellowship. That dash that our life had become unmanageable, and finding out what that means, which is why this is part of step one. So the best kept secrets in the rooms is the crossing over in step one. That dash that our life had become unmanageable, and finding out what that means. By the time we have finished, we will see the legitimacy of this take on the approach to step one. You may not see it as we are climbing this vast mountain, but you will see new things, have new information, and hopefully new experiences will follow. Once we get to the vista, the metaphoric conclusion to unmanageability, and from our vantage point, looking back, we will understand how Bill concludes this. The alcoholic will at certain times have no effect of mental defense against the first drink. On page 62, Bill ends his discussion on unmanageability by saying, "Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on my own power. We had to have our higher power's help. And that concludes step one. But we're not done with step one or unmanageability yet, as there will be more information and experiences to come in the next few weeks. This is just an overview for now. On page 43, Bill concludes that the first half of the first step, concerning addiction, he says after realizing his defense against it, that it would one day give way to having another drink. And of course it did happen, and more, and all he had learned of alcoholism, it did not occur to him. Bill says, I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them helplessly defeated. I knew then, and it was a crushing blow. He ends the passage with, it meant I would have to throw out several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy, but the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. On page 62, Bill concludes the second half of the first step on unmanageability, and Bill equates unmanageability with the spiritual malady, cancer of the soul, and as the bullseye. The real source of the problem of addiction, and Bill is very clear in various parts of the big book. Liquor is a symptom, and bottles are a symbol. Addiction is a symptom of a problem, and the spiritual malady is that problem, the cancer of the soul. Then on page 64, Bill states, resentment, the number one offender. It destroys more addicts than anything else. From its stem, all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. Just like the first half of the first step says, we have been spiritually sick. You really must hear this. Spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically, which is totally in keeping with how Bill approaches step 10. Bill says after we finish step 9, we have entered the world of the spirit, placed in a position of neutrality in regards to our addiction. But we are not cured. We are rocketed into the fourth dimension, the world of the spirit, and we stay in orbit around the light if we make daily adjustments of step 10 by spot check inventory, step 11 through the guidance of our higher power to make adjustments that get away from unmanageability, because we will have a gravitational pull of our unmanageable spirit malady. Because we are not cured, we have a daily reprieve. In step 11, we do our inventory at night to catch that what maybe we hadn't caught during our day with our spot 10 check-in. Then step 12 suggests that we awaken and stay awake by helping others by following our principles. It is simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness, which is the spiritual malady, the unmanageability. This is the world that we are entering through our step work. The meaning of the price we have to pay is the destruction of our self-centeredness. We must turn in all things to the Father of Light, who presides over us all. Bill is establishing that there is light, that it is belief, our truth, and in so making the turn, we inevitably turn from our self-centeredness to our God-centeredness. Yep, that is it. In a spiritual nutshell, this is the path. This is the process, and this is the promise of our spiritual awakening. So Bill's on page 76 is beginning to discuss steps 8 and 9, and he says, remember it was agreed at the beginning that we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol? Wait a minute. Did we agree to that? Well, at the beginning of step 3, We haven't seen it yet, but there is a question that you have been asked to ask yourself right from the beginning. Are you willing to go to any length? And what does that mean to you? The commitment he's referring to is doing the steps. The second half of the first step is that we ask that we be given the strength and direction, just like step 11 says, praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry that out. We need to know better before we can do better. And we know this is going to be the nature of unmanageability. That sometimes we know better and sometimes we don't. And of course, we actually know better and still don't do better. Our goal is to take the high road, but does that always mean we have to be on the high road? Do we always have to take it? Well, no, we don't, but there are consequences to being on the low road. So we pay attention to what that means. So you don't have to suffer the consequences of taking the low road, because taking the high road will keep us in orbit around the light. This is an address to the agnostics as Bill starts steps 2. He always pauses on the path and looks back over his shoulder to see where we have been. You have learned something of addiction in the doctor's opinion. Hopefully, you had an experience with this knowledge that flows into you and changes you in some way that at a deeper level, you realize you have no choice. Perhaps that is a fearful thought, but it might be motive to drive you forward with diligence in the application of these assignments and participation in this group. There is a big problem with our minds. I can't stay stopped. Or notice he is not saying it ends. So you don't have to have both of these components. That is interesting, as he is saying you don't have to have both of the signals of the body and the mind to be a qualified addict. He says one or the other. Quote, if when using you have little control over the amount you take, unquote. Once I start, I cannot stop. Bill says, you are probably an addict. He's not even going to make it black and white here. He is giving us a little wiggle room because Bill doesn't want to make predictions about you, because that's up to you to make that decision. Bill is asking you to find to Bill is inviting you to ask the questions of yourselves so that you come to your own conclusions from the inside out, not from the outside knowledge and experience that come from the outside world, as those answers will have little, if any, permanent effect. Answers and acknowledgments of experiences that come from the inside through our insights would change us indelibly. Bill says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. This is a huge leap at this point in our travels because Bill is only talking about addiction in the body and mind problem. And he is also saying that only our higher power can fix it. Perhaps this is the same conclusion you have come to through your own experience of having no choice. Herb is taking us beyond Bill's structure now into an introduction to unmanageability and the spiritual malady. Bill says to be doomed to an alcoholic death. An addict's death, the deterioration and disintegration that we see all around us, which you may have experienced or we have lived a spiritual basis, which are not easy alternatives for facing the fork in the road. The statistics for recovery and addiction are not good. I'm not going to go into the details because we don't want to focus on the negative aspects, but you can look up the numbers. Anyways, we are going to be in the survivors statistics because we are more willing than most, and we are an exceptional group who signed up for a long-term commitment with assignments and accountability, and yeah, who does that? People with the energy to reach for a vision of peace and connection to our power do. I'm not afraid of death, but I am petrified of suffering. That may come with the process, especially if it is a long death. Bill says to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half of our original fellowship were exactly that type. Bill is referring to the population of atheists and agnostics in the fellowship. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope that we were not true addicts. We're all there in that statement of Bill's. We still have a glimmer of hope that if we'll just get the right information or right formula, I will be healed and free from all of this nonsense, and I will finally be normal and not have to do all this work. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. We learn that we have to fully concede to our innermost selves that we are addicts. This is the first step of recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. Once you become a pickle, you will always remain a pickle. We hope against all hope that we are not real addicts. I am promising you a spiritual awakening, but I cannot promise you back to normal, for whatever normal means. On page 54, Bill says, after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis in our life, or else. Or else what? What is waiting around the corner for us? He does tell us there is a fork in the road and we have to choose. And one of those choices will involve death, or we can choose to have a spiritual basis. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life are sufficient to overcome our addiction, what are we talking about here? A mere code of morals. The first one that comes to Herb's mind is the Ten Commandments, but I see it as a superficial or thin layer of morality that can be easily overlooked, suggesting that someone's ethical behavior is not deeply held or a fundamental part of their character, but rather a convenient facade adopted for a particular situation. I could use this mere code of morals to describe a politician, if that helps you. Then Bill says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life was sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. So, what is basically happening here is reasoning along the lines of, if only I was more educated, had a deeper religious connection, read more self help books. None of those can hold a candle to a spiritual awakening. I have no doubt you will agree with me by the end of step 9, if you stay with this work and continue to show up. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life are sufficient to overcome our addiction, many of us would have recovered long ago. The reason for this statement is that addiction is an equal opportunity destroyer. Race, age, intelligence, you name it, there are no barriers to this. Listen when Bill says, we could will these things with all our might. This is Bill's introduction to willpower. He hasn't talked much about willpower, nor does the doctor talk about it in the doctor's opinion. Of course, there are some references to will and willpower and how they contribute to making mistakes, but here, a clear transition. We could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. There it is, step 1, unmanageability, a lack of willpower to make the proper choice. And now he goes on to recap it with, our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. I do what I don't want and I don't do what I want, but I am free, abstinent in my addiction for 6 months, a year, decade, but I'm behaving poorly and I'm suffering as a direct result, and so are the people around me. This is unmanageability. It has nothing to do with addiction because lack of power is my dilemma. We have to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves to deal with our spiritual malady. Well, that is exactly what this book is about. This book is about unmanageability and finding power. The big book's main objective is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problems. So, what does Bill mean? To enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. He is talking about our problem, not our addiction, because even saying at the beginning of the paragraph, lack of power is our problem. Lack of power is our dilemma. Lack of willpower is our dilemma. We do not have an effective power of choice, at least not in regards to our addiction. Bill's talking about unmanageability, the spiritual malady, about willpower, not the mind nor the body. That function in us that gives us free will. Bill is telling us we are not free, and as we thought about our will, it is not free at all. Good Lord. So, looking at page 52, which is one of my favorite passages, this is how Herb took me through this section. Bill's effort at illustrating and exposing us to a process that brings us directly to the critical question in step 2 on page 53. God is or God isn't. What is your choice? So I find it very interesting that Bill talks about not having a choice, a willpower, and then 2/3 of the way through the chapter, about step 2, he says, now use your will, but didn't he just tell us we can't effectively use our will? Now he's asking us to use our will? What the heck? Well, my will concerning my life and my addiction and my unmanageability is not effective. But as a human being, I do have free will. Not with regard to my addiction or my life and managing it. I have free will, meaning God or no God. That is what Bill is saying on page 53. This is the proper use of the will that he talks about on page 85. At the end of the 10th step, he says, the proper use of the mind is to create a vision of God's will for us. He is speaking about meditation, and the proper use of the will is to align with my will with my understanding of that reality. On page 52, it reads, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems on unmanageability this same readiness to change my point of view. This is in reference to the Set Aside Prayers change of attitude, which I have encouraged you all to have customized and personalized a Set Aside Prayer to use daily. The same readiness to change our point of view. We are having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our personal relationships. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy, couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not the basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of the lunar flight? That reference to the lunar flight, remember this is 1939 and people are talking about going into space and landing on the moon, which we know they did do, but Bill was kind of annoyed by that. So again, this is 1939, and science is talking about wanting to travel to the moon right along with the rocket. They had no rockets yet. They were still being invented, but there was lots of cartoons and lots of speculation that it was in the works. And as we know, it did happen through our history. But look at the key word, bedevilment, which carries a meaning of to be controlled as if by devils, which explains why I don't do what I want and I do what I don't want. I know better, but I don't do better, which makes me feel like a puppet on strings that is attached to something outside of myself. People and circumstances seem to be pulling my strings, and I don't have any self management or self control over my life. So, after years of being in recovery, I was slammed with the awareness and truth that I am 100% responsible for my thoughts, feelings, and actions, and most importantly, my behaviors in my life. Then I took direction from Herb when he said to take this same paragraph, page 52, second full paragraph down, and mark it with personal pronouns in the present tense because it's not personal and it's not written in present tense. We need this to be right now. So I followed the direction and it changed to this. This is an example. I have to ask myself instead of we had to ask ourselves, present tense right now, why I shouldn't apply to my human problems, my unmanageability, the same readiness to change my point of view. Left off. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our personal relationships. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. All of these don't have to apply 100%. It is on a scale of 1 to 10. I have included my numbers for reference before and after recovery. So these are my numbers before: 8, 9, 4, 8, 2, 12, 6, and 2. For the two that came up with the low numbers of 2, a feeling of uselessness and an inability to help others effectively, I was such a people pleaser that I I was 100% doing this. It was really I was nailing it, but I was exhausted, used, and abused. So that's the reflection of why those numbers are what they are. So we need to be as honest as we can with ourselves. This isn't about achieving the depth of despair because your life is horrible. It's about what is the quality of your life today, aside from your addiction. We're focusing on unmanageability and its function in our lives. These are my average numbers from today's vantage point. Take the time to rate your life on this scale, save it, and take another look at it when we finish the workshop. I'm sure there will be a significant difference. You can actually see the progress that you're making. And you can see when you look at my numbers that they've all come down quite a bit, quite very considerably. On page 62, with regard to unmanageability, Bill says, neither could we reduce our self centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We don't have the power of choice to manage our will, because on my own power, my will always choose me. This is our instinct wired into us from birth, at all levels from our brains, functioning as a survival mechanism. Our instincts are geared to take care of us. When we live with addiction, it puts that dysfunction on steroids, which leads to what Bill says is an addict as an extreme example of self will run riot. When you are in your addiction, but more often than not, people that get free of their addiction, but more often than not, people get free of their addiction eventually, they start feeling this way again because something is wrong, something is off. There's a hole in my soul. That is a nice way of describing the restless, irritable, and discontentedness that we so often feel as addicts. I've used this model before and will continue to use it. It's perfect for my approach to the first step other steps, but my overall approach to represent that we are human beings. We're all triangles. The steps are believed to essentially be an organic methodology built exclusively for us as human beings. Not that we are different and human because we have a body. It certainly doesn't make it certainly doesn't make us any different than a potato, a diamond, or a horse. It doesn't make us any different as we all have materiality. A diamond is inert and has no consciousness that we are aware of. A potato has a vegetative consciousness. Yeah, it's a stretch, but at least it has a life force that grows. A horse is a different issue than a potato in that a horse moves around and can learn. A potato has this basic physiology of growth, but a horse has the basic biology of emotions, literal emotions. Mammals all have emotions. In humans, the body instinct is managed by the brainstem, one of three brains that we have. The one that sits on top of our neck at the top of our spinal cord is the brainstem that manages instincts. That is the first brain that was developed in humans. Then, after about 1 million years, this area in us that we call emotions, the limbic system, some people call it, is a product of the body. Emotions are blind. They're instinctual responses to survival, anger, fight, fear, flight, and freeze. Dishonesty, meaning camouflage in humans, it's a conscious thing or an unconscious thing. But what makes us specifically human? It's a conscious thing or an unconscious thing, but what makes us specifically human so that we're different than a horse or a monkey or a whale? Because we have a mind. I want to take some time to clarify what the mind is, as the mind is not the brain and it's not an organ. The mind is a complex set of mental and psychic processes that enable an individual to experience and interpret the world. The mind is not made of physical stuff like the brain, but rather the mind is a set of mental phenomena like thoughts, memories, consciousness that emerge from the brain's complex network of neurons, electrical signals, and chemical messengers. In essence, the mind is an ongoing construction of the brain, body, and world. And while the brain is the physical organ of the mind itself is the collection of its functions. And having a mind, we can reflect on the meaning of the words that I'm using right now in an intentional way. No other being can do that. That is why we have language, in order to be able to communicate. But the real function that makes us specifically human and specifically individual is that we have free will. Again, this is not a place in us, and it's not an organ, it's a function that we'd have. In order to make functional decisions to take action on a voluntary basis, it is the basis of law in all civilized societies that people can make a decision and take needed action, and they're fully responsible for the decisions and consequences of those actions. Listen to what Bill said in step 11, the last two phrases: praying for the knowledge of God's will for us, connected to the mind, and praying for the power to do that. The power to do it, the ability to have my willpower choose to go in that direction that my mind knows is the right direction. Bill is making the distinction, and he does this throughout the book. So to review, we have looked at the body and the problem and the mind as the problem in addiction. The mind gets hijacked by the obsession, the thought we have no control over, which is the point. We have no choice. But I wonder, what did Bill mean when he puts unmanageability in the same category as the body and the mind? Why put it in step 1? Lack of power, lack of willpower is our dilemma. Are all the institutions wrong then? The lawyers, the therapists? It's not free. We don't have any free will at all. There are some philosophers that believe that everything is predetermined. Bill does not believe in predetermination. I don't either. So, how do we reconcile that Bill puts unmanageability as the second half of the first step? And by implication, throughout the book says it is the most important part. Lack of power is our problem. Addiction is not. It's a problem, but it is not the problem. Unmanageability is the problem. There is the will, not free. And where is the free? Huge question. Addiction is the problem of the body and the mind, and the source of the spiritual malady. So we look deeply at the brain and the mind as a problem in addiction. The mind gets hijacked by the obsession, a thought over which we have no control. That's the whole point of no choice. But what does Bill mean when he puts unmanageability in the same category as the body and the mind, and he puts it in step one? On page 64, and this is so relevant to step one, Bill says, in relation to resentment, resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more addicts than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. Bill is referring to the spiritual malady here, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick, says Bill. There it is, body and mind, first half of the first step. Then we have been spiritually sick, lacking power, which is unmanageability, which is the spiritual malady. And then Bill says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. On page 84 and 85, he says we come out of step 9 and enter into step 10. We enter the world of the spirit, and we are then placed in a position of neutrality in regards to our mind and body. Our addiction is neutralized, and we have recovered, past tense. But then he warns us that we have entered the world of the spirit, and we are not cured. We merely have a daily reprieve. From what he doesn't say, we can speculate it is the connection, and he assumes if you have gotten this far in the book, you have the same understanding. We are not cured of unmanageability. A daily reprieve contingent on our spiritual life is what we have. He calls this our way of life. He says we commence this way of life as we clean up the past and begin to incorporate steps 10, 11, and 12 into our daily lives because we need to stay cleaned up. That is a lot, but we are not talking about anything extravagant. We are talking about a change in attitude and a change in our motives, and hopefully, as in most cases, a dramatic change in our behaviors. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Then the real problem is addressed. The problem of my will. And I'll use the word spirit here because when we get to step 2, we are going to try to unpack where the word spirit fits in. Some say mind, body, and spirit, but I believe spirit is different than what we call the will. When I think of spirit, I think of my higher self, that part that connects to my creator, and it's not like the will. I was taught that spirit was my connected part to my source. Some people call the soul the spirit. This will be looked at in depth in step 2. So substance and process, we have seen them before. They're professional terms used to distinguish between different kinds of addictions. There is no substance involved in a bunch of addictions like pornography, gambling, workaholism, love addiction, overspending. You get the idea. Notice the percentages, though. People who fall under unmanageability is 100%, 10 out of 10. Let's take a look at it again after we see the varieties of substance and process addictions. take a good look. There are likely things on this list that you maybe hadn't considered yet. You may not have considered anger, dishonesty, or fear as addictive. Bill says in the 12 and 12 in chapter 4 about inventory, he uses the model of instincts gone awry. Those are the instincts fight, flight, and freeze, which we will explore a little later on. Step 1 is about powerlessness. Everybody can quote it. I mean, they don't even have to think about it, as it is almost a robotic act to use the word powerless. But I want you to think about it. What does it mean? It means no choice. It means no power. Of course, when we're talking about our addiction, it means no choice. When I engage in it, I lose control. And Dr. Silkworth was very clear. It was his opinion that there is something biologically wrong with us. But fortunately, Bill had exposure to the Oxford group, and they talked about a transformation of the mind that is necessary because the mind is actually the problem. So it was pursued and looked at. Obsession and delusion. And add in the definition of insanity according to the Big Book on page 37. And also that we are powerless and most everybody gets real. No choice. But what about this part? The will, the manageability, the spiritual malady. Carl Jung is the doctor who sent the first person that we know of to find a spiritual solution. Roland Hazard went to the Oxford group and found his awakening and freedom from alcohol. And then because Dr. Silkwood was treating alcoholics, Bill W. finally found his way into Towns Hospital, where Dr. Silkwood explained all of the physical aspects to him. Ebby takes him to the Oxford group, where he becomes very familiar with the Oxford group's 6 steps to have his spiritual awakening. And you see that when you read about it, if you want to, but we will look at it in step 2. But where are the bedevilments? I'm having trouble saying it. I'm having trouble in my personal relationships. I cannot control my emotional nature. These are taken from page 52 of the Big Book, which was suggested to edit this page to reflect personal pronouns, making it about ourselves and making it present tense, meaning apply it to today, not yesterday or when I was not aware of my addiction issue. It is about our current situations. I am prey to misery and depression. I can't make a living that satisfies me. I have a feeling of uselessness. I am full of fear and anxiety. I am unhappy. I can't seem to be of real help to other people, nor do I care to. Powerless in my body with my addiction. Powerless in my mind with my addiction as part of the obsession. The real key to understanding, no choice. We have no choice, but here we are in a position of neutrality after finishing the steps and practicing 10, 11, and 12. And remember, Bill says we are not cured. We have a daily reprieve. Now take a look at what is on the screen. See selfishness and self-centeredness as the bullseye heart of the matter, and the part. And that part we will review today is on page 60. So we've got selfishness, and self-centeredness. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Restless, irritable, and discontent, and I am abstinent, but I am not happy. Page 60. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody's circumstances and people. We have been in our own delusional world because we don't know that our motives are corrupt. Most people try to live by self-propulsion, especially in the US. We were built on self-reliance. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. always trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players. But it is the director's job, and we make ourselves the center of our lives because we own it, and it's wonderful. A spiritual experience, actually. I am the center of my world. Bill says if his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as I wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including myself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous, may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self sacrificing. They sound like Mother Teresa. On the other hand, she may be mean, egotistical, selfish, dishonest, basically the devil incarnate. Can you hear the control and manipulation in that statement? I will be as nice to you as long as you do what I expect you to do. So, this is about willpower. I am making the decision. I am consciously or unconsciously attempting to be the director of my life, in your life, in all the lives around me. My boss, coworkers, maybe my fellowship meetings, the sponsors I have. I don't I don't take direction well because I make up my own mind as to my program or not the program. But as with most humans, we are more likely to have varied traits. On a scale of 1 to 10, some of us are a 2 in some areas and some of us are an 8. It depends on the day or the week or year or even you age and stage you're in. That can change. But what comes of this? Well, the show doesn't come off very well. I begin to think life doesn't treat me right. What a disaster. If you haven't done it yet, on page 52, change the we's, ours, and etc. So instead of saying what is printed, we have to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems, into I have to ask myself why I shouldn't apply to my human problems, into. If you follow this suggestion, it is a very powerful process to write it as personal in present tense. And then if you read it out loud so that you can actually hear what it says and have that experience, it can be profound. And Bill adds, he becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious. Hear the manipulation again. As the case may be, still, the play doesn't suit him. Life isn't going according to his script. This is the biggest lesson that people experience through step 4 work. I wasn't aware that I had a script about who I am and another script about who you should be, and basically how the world should spin. And let's talk about that word for a minute, should. Should is the key, and it will come up again when we do step 4 because it unlocks the door to our belief system. When I think, feel, or say should, it is a yellow light of caution. And I need to pause when I think or feel or say should and really take a look at it. Is it objective? Is it the truth? Is it my honest experience? Is it real? What is motivating me? Or is it just another piece of the delusional story that I have developed about my world and the script that I have written about the world and the people in it? In step 4, when you put your experiences of powerlessness and no choice, and we look at the resentment that corrodes our soul alive, that fear that fuels and that dishonesty that camouflages our hiding because we are so consciously or unconsciously afraid, we will be found out for who we really are, in part because of our delusions about ourselves and its shortcomings, or in the opposite direction, an exaggeration about our grandiosity. It is an amazing journey, more therapeutic than any therapy I have ever received. Step 4 and 5 penetrated the root of the problems that were cropping up everywhere in my life, and I still use it on a daily basis. Jung famously stated, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you call it fate. By bringing them to light, we gain the power to change them, breaking the cycle that might otherwise feel like fate. It is important to take our ownership of our lives rather than attributing everything to external circumstances. The ebb and flow of life can be more manageable when we are in tune with the deep currents of our own psyche. Jung's quote is a powerful reflection on the importance of self awareness and personal accountability in shaping our lives, echoing his timeless wisdom about the unconscious mind and how it left to its own devices, it becomes responsible for fate. They are perennial victims, not taking responsibility for their lives today. Many people have been the victim of terrible, unspeakable events, especially by the ones who were supposed to love and care for us. And it's very sad and unfortunate. But Herb says that once you are over 18, deal with it. And he says, with compassion, deal with it. It is not their problem any longer. It is yours. When you come to the age of adulthood, maturity, where we take 100% responsibility for the life that we are living today. More on that when we get to step 4. So here is the key that Bill gives us to unlock unmanageability. On page 62, Bill says, selfish, self-centeredness, that is the root of my troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and pity, I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, I have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. And this is how we behave. Oh, by the way, he upset me this time, or they got angry at me, or I would ask what to do, but did I do it? Did I do it wrong? I made a joke about them, and I guess they couldn't handle it. So was it without provocation? Bill says we look at resentments and we see their origin in ourselves. Then he says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. Good news and bad news. The good news is if we are the cause, we can make different choices and the trouble goes away. This is the turnaround in step 3. Unmanageability is the human condition, the human problem. The spiritual malady is all human beings being selfish. As addicts, we are wired to be even more selfish than most others. Above everything, Bill says, we must be rid of the selfishness. We must, or it will kill us. And God makes that possible. What Bill is saying is that I am powerless, therefore, I need God to get rid of the selfishness, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without our higher power's aid. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing it away or trying on our own power, says Bill. Our own power, the deficiency of our will, because my will always choose me on its own power. I do not have freedom here. I have no choice. It's a survival mechanism, the way I am built, that my will always choose me over anyone and anything else. Always. Herb says we are not God, and this is a major revelation to most of us. We are not the center of the universe, but we are the center of our universes, and we make decisions based on self, with which go across the life force and across general principles, spiritual principles, and we are taking care of ourselves by our efforts at self-will, and the whole point of step 3 is to turn my will and my life to be in alignment with the flow of life force. Step 1 is I am an extreme example of self-will run riot, and I cannot turn to be in alignment on my own power. This is the launching pad for us. Then, looking for a power that will put us in proper alignment. We stay on top of doing step 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis so that we stay in the flow and our lives work. This is how Bill ends step 1 on page 43. The alcoholic at certain times has no effect of mental defense against the first drink. He is not talking about willpower or unmanageability. He is talking about addiction. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such defense. His defense must come from a higher power. And also on page 62, Bill says, we had to have God's help. So these are some questions from the homework, and I will have people raise their hands. People did raise their hands and answer one of the questions listed. We don't have the participation of the group due to the meeting not being recorded properly. But you can take a look at the questions and answer them on paper or at least in your mind. Am I having trouble with personal relationships? Can I control my emotions? Am I prey to misery and depression? Do I derive satisfaction from my way of life? Am I or can I be self supporting? Do I feel useful? Am I full of fear? Am I unhappy? Am I able to be a real help to others? Do I really care to be useful? How honest have I been with others or myself about these issues, my efforts and my failures, my doubts and my dissatisfactions? And lastly, do I repeatedly do what I really don't want to do, or do I repeatedly not do what I want to do? Look at these questions, try to answer them, and maybe even meditate on them. And thank you for watching. I hope you saw something that will help you on your path to freedom.